being one of them. A term that I'm sure many of us are familiar with, but not in this context, which I think maybe adds another layer of architectural exploration for us just to consider. A set of memories that in some cases were physically obliterated to remove a past maybe as a rejection, or in the case of people returning back, having a difficulty connecting with a larger cultural landscape, possibly that they felt it should have been available to them. From your perspectives, how do you grapple with that dimension, or how are you stretching it in a way that sheds new light on even just that topic, collective memory?
Yeah, I can go first. Well, thanks for the question. So I happen to work actually with a professor who is a specialist in cultural memory. Because one of the things I definitely do not want to do is tackle subjects that I cannot fully adequately engage with. So I've been kind of observing both the ways in which she's been tackling this when we go down to the needs. So one of the things that we have been doing for all of the buildings we documented is and that was led by her, which is curating conversations with the building caretakers and historians to tell the story of these buildings. So that's one of the ways that she's been trying to do, which is we can't tell the story of these buildings ourselves. It has to be told by either the descendants of the people who have direct knowledge of what happened, why the buildings are the way they are. And that way, if there's anything that we can then tie back to any available documentation, that would be the way to go. And so part of the prototype database we have right now in there, a key part of that is the sampling of those conversations. So, for example, the imam, kind of the story of why the mosque was built the way it was, and the different layers of history that happened. He tells that quite well, albeit in French. But he does get into that quite a bit. And on the flip side of that as well, which again Dr. Patricia did quite well, was to talk with the current administrators. One of the things that we found that was kind of interesting to me is the local municipalities' priorities on what should be preserved and what should not. You can see from the distance that they're skewed. So voodoo is a big part of it. So they take a lot of their voodoo centers. In fact, every community has its own voodoo shrines, and those are all well funded, all renovated. And then right next to that, you've got this kind of buildings that are much bigger, they're dwarfed in scale, and they're falling apart, right? So that conversation between what the local municipality is willing to spend money on to retell the story and maintain versus what they're not willing to do. So that's been something that was interesting for me to kind of see, and when you ask, why the investment on one side and not the other, you tend not to get a straight answer in terms of why. So there is, to me, an unanswered question there regarding how is these kind of difficult questions of memory of people who were local and those who came back, how are those valued? That building that I showed, which was the Da Silva Museum, the government actually took it over by eminent domain, demolished it, and built a voodoo museum, which a friend of mine is an architect, worked on. And so he insisted on retaining one facade of the wall, that the only thing that he could retain as part of trying to kind of keep that. So there is a lot of vagueness that happens in terms of what the authorities would want to celebrate and what not. So anyway, I'll stop and not talk too much. I think from my standpoint of view, I think working with specialists in this subject has been kind of the way for me to not try and fight something I'm not necessarily an expert in.
Great. That's a really fancy answer. For me, to be honest, it's not that different as defined by Aldo Rossi of a collective memory, but touching upon to my personal level or personal experience, and also it's related to the site of this project, which is the old downtown in Seoul, and then a lot of buildings and the streetscapes are preserved because it has a royal palace. There's a certain building code and law that limiting the building height and the further development. But as you guys know, South Korea, after the liberation in 1945 up to 1990s, we went through a lot of changes, dictatorship, Korean War, and also IMF. That's why the people finally began talking about this issue in 1996. It's like 45 years after the liberation. So during those, the chaotic changes in every aspect of the nation, a lot of images were kind of lost and erased. But whenever I walk to the old downtown Seoul with my father, who is 65, I still have things to talk about with him, walking through that town. Leaving the town, there's nothing really to talk about with my father in terms of architecture. But then yeah, I kind of wanted to share the experience, which was a really precious experience with others in Korea as well, especially at my generation.
Yes, please.
Question for real quick one.
Yes.
I guess it's more of a historical question, but or curiosity. When the Buddha, right?
Buddha, yes.
When the Buddha people returned to Benin, I'm just curious to know why. Okay, obviously they brought sort of like this history with them, this kind of new methods of construction which were learned sort of in their foreign country, but why did they not maybe adapt or why did they not use vernacular? You know what? Why did they, as a mode of like rebellion, right? Why would they not kind of return to maybe the indigenous or kind of vernacular architecture of Benin, and instead sort of import, import the kind of colonial architecture? That's the kind of piece of the puzzle to me that was a little strange.
Yeah.
I thought, like, wouldn't they want to kind of rebel against that or eradicate that history, but instead they kind of like import it into, and now it's like forever there, so you're reminded of, of the slavery, so to speak. Like, so I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I know it's not exactly, the focus of your work, but it was something that I just couldn't shake, you know?
Yeah, that's really, it's a puzzling question for me too. But I think one of the things that I learned when, like if you went to Ouida, I will use this example and I will kind of come back to that. If you went to Ouida, where that door of no return is, so there's actually 6 stages that used to happen, which is, there's a tree where all the kind of enslaved people were sold. Like that tree is still there, it's preserved. And then Felix de Souza has a big house actually to restore, it's in good condition, the big courtyard, it's been, all of that celebrating somebody who had this kind of oversized role in what happened. Like that to me, I just could not, process my head. But then as I was talking to people, one of the things that I quickly noticed was that because some of these people had such a big role, they still actually permeates today in today's governance. Meaning people who are in power today, some of them are actually still descendants.
Right.
So over the years, that kind of power structure really remained to kind of protect what we see today. On the other hand, as I mentioned earlier, the Buddha themselves were not monolithic. So you had people who were, like the people who actually sold people off, who, then welcomed these people in their land when they came back. And that group became what's called a Buddha. So in a way, that kind of amalgamation of, it's something that I cannot really, not explain it, say, like I can't have any intelligent discussion, but what I know is that the conversation with the gentleman of the house that we are renovating, the way he put it was this, that when I was doing a conversation with him, was that because a lot of these people were not being welcomed, so it wasn't like the local community really welcomed them. So they actually had nowhere to go in terms of land and opportunity, except these other people that they had. Also language, a lot of those, like the other way he put it, a lot of the people were coming back, the language community they had were the people that had sold them, which is Portuguese, right? And then because of this kind of rejection from the local population that they had, it almost like became clear that they needed to create new sort of identity. And what they leveraged and leaned on was the skills they had to build that. The only changes, as I mentioned, that you visibly see is the use of courtyards, because courtyards are a big deal of even the traditional architecture, how it's built. So even those that would have buildings actually are built, organized around courtyards. You have like the public courtyard, you have the private courtyard, and it's kind of procession. So that actually leverages local building techniques. But in terms of how the building looks, the way he put it was that it was almost like a statement. And over time, the Buddhists became elite. So during the revolution, all of this blaming was blaming the elites because of the kind of style of architecture they were building, which was not synonymous with local building, and they became the target. So it's one of those like difficult subjects that I'm still kind of, as I talk to people, trying to figure out, how they felt about the architecture, the expression of it at least, right? Like the way it looks very European, and this kind of context that had both traditional and colonial. So I don't have an answer for you, but those are some of the anecdotes that I was getting from conversations with people, and also just for me, like when you do go to Wida and you see the almost like originality of where all of those things used to happen, which is the mass graves of people who were dying before they could get into the ships, that the way they were buried. You see the tree, the original tree. It's unsettling in a way, right? But in a way, I think because it's so preserved as it is, you can't avoid it. It's there, So it's not an answer, but
No, but it does shed some light on. You could start to sort of see through those anecdotes that it's obviously a complicated and twisted history that it kind of makes sense. How do you survive when you're being rejected in your homeland?
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of understand that.
Well, I really enjoyed both presentations, and I'm sorry I was late for one, but I was trying to hop from one room to the other, trying to time it, and I didn't realize there was not 3 here, so I guess that's what happened. But really interesting presentations. I really appreciated the focus on the kind of social, cultural, socio-economic, social-political, social-ideological components of architecture in the built environment are so important to people, and I think there's some interesting things about past that is not erased, and of course raises questions, and past that is somewhat obliterated, but then we need to talk about it. So in a sense, there's a paradox about, in both cases, the relationship between what remains and what is erased, and how we talk about it. So I think there's language and how we make sense of things. It's kind of at the center of the conversation of the two presentation. So this is just a thought, but then I have a question that is maybe more to congratulations on your thesis, by the way, very nicely put together. My question would be about if you were able, maybe either during the thesis or the initial research, or maybe now that you make sense of it, to connect your work to the work of others. I'm wondering if others are having this conversation or are doing something either on the main site that you focused on or the other sites, and how your thesis investigation speaks to some other current efforts. How does it distance itself or maybe align with other people's work? If you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely, because during my thesis preparation and during the seminar research class happened last year, I was thinking a lot about the same thoughts about how to disseminate, this architectonic iteration or more like similar approaches at another site in Korea, because there are so many, there's like hundreds of them that are still remaining untouched. So I was kind of thinking of maybe making like a little postcards with iteration drawings on it and disseminate them to other people, or even making because like those are really simple solid and void exercises that could be really great design guidelines for the younger, like first year college students in architecture school. So so going back to the questions, I think I still want to populate, disseminate this kind of approaches and testing this similar exercise with other buildings in Korea, not only in Korea but also in other worlds. Like for example, like first Korean modern architecture built by the Korean architects in Expo, for example. Yeah, I'm not sure if that could be those answers. But,
Yeah, no, I think it's good you're trying to also understand how your work can be disseminated or
Right.
connect with others. I think my question was more about maybe either thinking of this more interdisciplinary, like what are historians saying about this? What are anthropologists saying about this? What are philosophers saying about this? Or what are other designers saying about this, and maybe their point of view is quite different, you know,
Right.
about what the solution might be. Is the solution programmatic or formal?
Right.
Is the solution an intervention that is physical, or maybe programming, or
Right.
event organizing, or campaigning? I mean, what, so I'm, you know,
Right,
and
right.
again, this is,
Sorry, yeah.
it's a thesis and you're focused on designing your own thesis, so
Right.
I know that, I teach thesis, so
Yeah.
I know how that works, but I'm wondering, or maybe this is an opportunity to reflect more about it now and really think about what other ways completely to frame the issue, and maybe it could be more interdisciplinary, you know,
Right.
what are anthropologists saying, or what are philosophers saying, or what are, again, other ways of seeing the issue, what could that suggest, or?
Right, I mean, absolutely, yeah.
Well, I think also just like the theater of it. So Lucas, I know Lucas. I
Oh, yeah.
graduated with him from grad school and he also taught architectural college for several years. I think that I just wanted to remark on just the main, you know, you said it so well in terms of the both of your presentations, and Killian, your sort of it's like just sort of trying to preserve something that is washing away, and then you are almost embodying the bringing back of that through the way that you delivered your thesis, and kind of theatrical. Like there could be, I mean, you could do, you know, what are there playwrights, or could that be a story of just what you very much did, right? Like you could create a play about that. I think that is what I very much appreciate, how you're bringing both the kind of built environment and reconstructing and redesigning something through your thesis project, but just the way that people experience that, and the set you built, and you know, the cigarette, and living in the 90s, and that is bringing, I think, back that feeling of willingness to be disturbed, which sort of to your question, you know, a reflection on where we are now, but that as humans, having the state of a willingness to be disturbed and be in that disturbance and feel that disturbance, and you know, and have it be around you, and just you brought that, you know, you kind of brought that, and so just to commend you, and it's like really amazing, inspiring work. And I guess I would say, what's next, and even I think with the sort of unknowns that you're facing, Killian, how can you, with those unknowns, what's next with what you can do and what you can control, and then I'd love to know what's next for you.
Sorry, going back to the other question,
Okay.
and pretty much, I think that you almost answered that. So like the conclusion of my presentation was a selected interview of like autobiographies from local people with various backgrounds. So I reached out to architectural historians in Korea, architects and students, you know, like news media outlet people, and also high school teachers. But interestingly, people who are in architecture, they don't like to talk about these projects. They say, why are we touching upon the past? It's already gone, you know. But the high school teachers or people who are like anthropologists, they are more keen into the thesis aspects, especially that, you know, I am finally bringing this course onto the public level, and they would like to talk about it. I don't know what is happening in architecture school in Korea, but I want to stimulate the discussions with the professors there, historian, or even the exhibition curators in Korea. Yeah, so it's going to be interdisciplinary collaboration with the people.
Great. I think what I find fascinating with his work, and I'll come back to your question about what's next, is that at least there's some documentation you're working with, right? Like you have some, you know, some historical data that you can work with to try and kind of get the conversation going. And where I find myself starting in at least this prototype phase in Benin is that a lot of these buildings were built, so the builders who were building this, like, it was almost like a band, the way when you read in the text, these were a group of builders that had the knowledge to build in a certain way. So they were hired and want a Naguda type building, and they will come and build it for you. Like, there's no plans, they just build it for you, right? So once you start actually going to the local buildings department and try to find, even the mosque, try to find the plans we can get was the one that was built in Nigeria. So we are starting almost at the ground zero, which is first let's just document these buildings, let's digitize them, and then right now the only way we could do it, which was the quickest way, is LiDAR scanning. So that actually has made this work of document, and also because a lot of the documentation that needs to be done, especially in these buildings, they are right next to a lagoon. So some of the challenges is the flooding that's coming from the lagoon, environmentally kind of induced challenges. So by being able to LiDAR scan, we're able to get other information that is now helping us to get into the next stages of the conversation, which is instead of looking at individual buildings, how can we look at this building as part of the kind of urban historic core that is not just the Aguda buildings, it's the traditional buildings as well that are facing the same challenges. And in order for them to really have better protections, this idea of getting the local protection doesn't mean much. Like the local municipality will come and put a sticky on it, and they will actually put a sticky in a place that the building is falling apart. It doesn't mean much. So the local stakeholders want to get UNESCO heritage status. That can allow them to get funding. So for me, the next stage is working with the local municipality. There's a new office for patrimony, which is heritage there, that are a key stakeholder for the next stage, which is documenting these at urban scale, and not just documenting buildings, but documenting other conditions like flooding and the roads, infrastructure that is encroaching on these buildings. So that information they can use it to try and attain the kind of urban core UNESCO heritage. The other next steps is really like to move towards kind of conservation, stages with partners who want to bring some of this building, or at least renovate some of this building and do more with what we have. Like that partisan residence, which is the oldest Abuja building, that we're doing that right now. That's gonna help inform, our approach to the materials, our approach to how do you rebuild something that has that painful legacy. Do you just recreate it? What does that look like? So I think conversations on that is going to be something that I'm looking forward to in the next stages of this. And I think lastly, the idea of once you've documented these buildings, can we make them available to people to I don't know, maybe do virtual tours and things like that? Because I think without appreciating what these buildings are and the stories behind them, again, they're quickly forgotten. So I think that digitizing is giving us the opportunity to connect the digital point cloud, create, again, we tested this in an exhibition at Northeastern, where we can bring VR and then immersive audio for people to hear the stories. So that's another element that I think could at least continue this idea of, education and making sure that the narratives are not lost. So it's a multi-pronged next steps. But I think I would like to, I see this almost like a long-term thing that is not just for now, depending on funding and everything else. The idea will be to kind of work on those three parts, next to each other anyway.
Do you mind speaking to the involvement of your students with the work, and did they come to Benin? Did they help you? How long did it take? I know you mentioned drones and LiDAR. So would you mind just kind of how this integrates into the course?
Yeah. So so far this coming studio will be the first time